I interviewed some sensational people over the years, some mysterious people, talking about mysterious things that occurred in the deserts. The ET lived in a house on the island and appeared human, according to 𝗪𝗓𝗓𝗦𝗧𝗘. The ET had extraordinary powers. The ET could float rather than walk and could defy gravity. There were a number of test ranges around Area 51 where the government tested exotic technology, ET crafts, lasers, and other things. Hello, my name is Richard Doty. I'm a former intelligence officer with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. From the very early era of the UFO dilemma, mysterious people have surfaced. Some were pioneers of the UFO early days. Names such as Kenneth Arnold, Donald Keyhole, George Adamski, to name just a few. All these people were pioneers starting the interests of UFOs, the mystique of the UFO phenomena. But these people, such as George Adamski, who claimed to have had contacted with a person from Venus, he wrote 3 books, talked about his exploits within the UFO phenomena. He created some phenomena himself within his books. Or people like Donald Keyhole, who was one of the key members of Project Blue Book. There's other people that have led and continued the UFO phenomena. A person such as Art Bell. Art Bell, a good friend of mine, had a fantastic radio program. He was involved coast to coast, and then he went on later in his own radio program out of his house at Pahrump, Nevada. Art interviewed some sensational people over the years, some mysterious people, talking about mysterious things that occurred in the deserts, different desert areas of Nevada. And then there's George Noory, who's the current host, George Knapp. George Knapp is another one that's really has moved the UFO interests through his television contacts and television programming in Nevada. And then there's Whitley Strieber. Whitley has written some books about it and has spoken about it and has really moved on the interests of UFO and especially the psychological portions of some of the UFO dilemma. The first person I want to talk about is Jamie Shandera. Who is Jamie Shandera? How does he fit into the UFO dilemma? Shandera surfaced first in 1981 as a friend of Bill Moore's. Jamie was in the film industry. Jamie had contact with the Office of Naval Intelligence because he did some photographic work for the Office of Naval Intelligence. He had a contract, a small contract, to do some filming for ONI, abbreviation for Office of Naval Intelligence, in the 1970s. ONI used Shandera on a classified mission once. But Jamie really didn't know what that classified mission was. He was told to do some things, take some photographs, which he did. But during that mission, Shandera claimed to have contact with an extraterrestrial being near Coronado Island, which is in San Diego. The ET lived in a house on the island and appeared human, according to 𝗪𝗓𝗓𝗦𝗧𝗘. The ET had extraordinary powers. The ET could float rather than walk and could defy gravity. Wow, that's really perked the interest of not only the Office of Naval Intelligence, but other people that Jamie had contact with. Shandera utilized some of his contacts within the film industry to obtain cameras, or special cameras, so he could use to spy in this house. When the ONI found out about it, found out about what he was doing, they ceased all contact with Jamie. But in the meantime, the ONI, with assistance of other federal agencies, actually put their own surveillance on this house in Coronado Island But when they moved in to search the house, they found the ET had vanished. The ET house was thoroughly searched, but nothing connecting the ET to any known types of extraterrestrial powers were found. Jamie was detained and interrogated, but never charged with an offense. In 1980, 𝗪𝗓𝗪 was again detained by the Navy security personnel when he strayed into a U.S. Navy SEAL training area on Coronado Island. According to 𝗪𝗓𝗪, the ET asked Jamie to go there and wait for a craft to land. No craft landed, and he was eventually charged with trespassing onto a military installation by the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. And eventually, the federal government charged him in federal court, or in U.S. Magistrate Court, with trespassing. O&I went in and asked the U.S. Magistrate to dismiss the charges against Jamie. Now, why would they do that? Jamie was secretly working for O&I again, and we found this out when the working group had strayed into that matter and obtained some information about Jamie 𝗪𝗪𝗪. So that's who Jamie 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 was, and that's how he was connected to the UFO phenomenon. Let's talk about William Moore. William Moore, as most people know, was a co-author of 2 top-selling books. The original Roswell incident. He wrote the book, was co-author of the book, and he also wrote the Philadelphia experiment about a ship that allegedly disappeared during training in 1942. Moore was a school teacher and a union organizer who left the classroom and became a full-time UFO investigator. Moore was involved with MUFON and other UFO working groups. Moore was known to U.S. intelligence, specifically me, because he had contacts with Soviet citizens inside the Soviet Union. Now, that's key to us because we had a way or a method to transmit or communicate with people inside the Soviet Union back in the 80s. And we used Moore for that. So Moore was famously known within the intelligence community for being a pretty good spy, a pretty good contact, or an asset that allowed us to communicate through him to people within the Soviet Union. I recruited Bill Moore. I recruited him to be a spy within the UFO community. That's pretty well known now. In 1989, during a convention, Bill Moore told his story, released that information, upset a lot of people within MUFON and the former APRO because he was spying on them. And why did we want somebody, why did U.S. intelligence want somebody within the UFO community? Well, we wanted to know what was going on within the UFO community. Sometimes people reported things to them that they didn't report to the government. And so we kept track of the information that MUFON was collecting regarding UFOs, ET contacts, abductions, and other things. And that's why we utilized Bill Moore. Now, Bill was also involved in the Paul Bennewitz case. U.S. intelligence asked Moore to contact Bennewitz and seek information on his activities. Now, just to refresh everyone's memories, Paul Bennewitz was a scientist who worked outside, had an office outside Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He also lived right outside the base perimeter. And he was photographing strange things that are occurring on the base. We began an investigation. It was my investigation. And Bill Moore assisted us in the investigation. Bill Moore had already had contact with Paul Bennewitz because, believe it or not, Paul Bennewitz was a member of MUFON. In fact, he was state director of MUFON in New Mexico. So Bill Moore had had contacts with Paul Bennewitz, and we're friends. Bill Moore provided valuable information regarding Paul Bennewitz, his secrets, some of the things that Paul was doing that he didn't let the government know he was doing. He also performed some highly classified operations for U.S. intelligence, which, believe it or not, are still classified today. So Bill Moore was a key person within the intelligence community, and not so much from connections to the UFO community, but within the intelligence community, he did some amazing things to provide information to us that didn't involve anything to do with UFOs or ETs. There's another guy by the name, and probably some of you, or maybe most of you, watching this presentation, probably never heard of. But this person is Joseph Yeager. Yeager was a retired U.S. intelligence agency employee. Yeager had worked for the intelligence community for over 25 years. Yeager was one of the original behind-the-camera persons at the 1988 UFO Cover-Up live show. Now, a lot of you remember that. You can go back and even YouTube it. It's still on the internet. It was a program that was live in Hollywood. They had a lot of people on the show. I was supposed to be on the show hidden behind a camera, but I was not. I wasn't there. It wasn't me. But Joseph Yeager was there, and he was one of the ones behind the cameras. In 2005, Yeager initiated the Serpo email exchange with Victor Martinez. Now, I just unloaded a lot of information to the viewers out there about who actually started the Serpo story. And that was Joseph Yeager. Now, unfortunately, Yeager passed away a few years ago. But Yeager showed documents which were marked classified, which related to the Serpo story. The documents detailed the entire story of Project Crystal Night, or the exchange program involving 12 members of the United States Astronaut Corps on their mysterious journey to the planet Serpo. Whether you want to believe it or not, there's so many different parts of this story, the Serpo story, which, if you listen, we'll discuss in another episode. But Yeager provided details on every aspect of the Serpo story, including airing a film from the 1950s that showed 𝗎𝗑, extraterrestrial biological entity that was found alive at the Roswell crash site, and the communications device that 𝗎𝗑 got out of the craft. Yeager presented a highly classified briefing to people like Wendell Stevens, Robert Dean, Stan Friedman, Gene Muskowski, Tom Mack, Carl Dale, and even myself. And he would defy anyone that wanted to argue with him about what he knew. Another person that's some people will know the name, and probably some won't, is Gene Muskowski. He also goes by Gene Lakes. Muskowski was a former U.S. intelligence agency employee for over 30 years, meaning he was a real spy, on the ground, boots on the ground, kicking you-know-what in foreign countries, collecting intelligence. After his retirement, he worked as chief security at, guess where? Area 51, which is, of course, inside the Nellis Test and Training Range. Muskowski gave a highly controversial presentation at a 1999 UFO convention to a select few about the immediate danger of ET activities on Earth. Presented evidence that ETs are working among us today. Muskowski is about 96 years old and still alive. He's still online. You can still see his emails at a number of different sites. But ironically, Muskowski, he agreed in some of the Serpo story, but he disagreed on all of it. So what's the truth about Serpo and what's fiction? We'll talk about that later. Another highly controversial person within the UFO community, most good insiders, people with good access to the inside, will know the name Paul McGovern. McGovern was the chief of security operations at Area 51 after Muskowski. McGovern had complete knowledge of all UFO and ET activities at the test site, Area 51. McGovern was briefed into research and development operations on both Area 51 and Tonopah Air Force Base. Now remember, Tonopah is just connected next to Area 51. Now Paul McGovern talks a different story about the Serpo mystery. He agrees to some, disagrees with some of the other information. That presents a problem with people within the UFO community trying to understand the Serpo story and trying to connect the dots to determine whether it's a real incident. Did we really send 12 astronauts to the planet Serpo in an ET craft? Or was that just a project that the government created for disinformation? Disinformation against who? The Soviet Union. Remember, now this is back in the 60s. If we were to present information out there that we had contact with extraterrestrials and floated that information to the Soviets, wouldn't you think the Soviets would be scared that the aliens would be giving us advanced technology, advanced crafts, advanced weapon systems that we could eventually use against the Soviet Union? Could be a disinformation campaign. Maybe that's what Serpo was. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Notable mentions within the classification of mystery people within the UFO community. Carl Dale. Carl Dale, retired U.S. Air Force intelligence officer. Now, Carl has a number of stories about what he did as a U.S. intelligence officer within the Air Force. He was an officer. I think he gained the rank of major. He was on some highly classified missions outside the country, investigating UFO activities and crash sites. Robert Collins, retired U.S. Air Force captain. Mark Filburn, retired DIA employee. And Tom Mack. These people contributed to the UFO dilemma in several different ways. Each had their own agenda on the real subject and exactly what that entailed. Now, people like Tom Mack and Mark Filburn, I think some people know Mark. He was on the internet claiming to have worked out at Area 51 on some classified projects for a U.S. contractor. He did. It was verified that Mark worked out there. And he did work for that particular government contractor, EG&G. And he did have access to some really classified information. Tom Mack worked at Area 51. He was he was an operations officer, a civilian operations officer, and he managed the test ranges. There were a number of test ranges around Area 51 where the government tested exotic technology, ET crafts, lasers, and other things. And Tom Mack was in charge of managing those operations. So Tom worked out there. We know he worked out there. It was verified that he worked out there. Unfortunately, Tom Mack passed away a few years ago, but his legend remains within the UFO community, within the government. He was highly respected. George Knapp knew him, spoke to him many times. Art Bell had him on his show as a mystery guest, never disclosing his name. I think he was on Art's show 3 different times, where he talked about Area 51 and what was going on inside Area 51. Finally, I have to mention the one person who has kept private from public view all these years. He was a real Falcon. The person that initiated the Avery Working Group, his name was Richard Helms. Helms was the original spy, starting out with the Office of Strategic Services back in World War II. During World War II, he did some extraordinary things for the United States. When the CIA was formed in 1947, after the National Security Act was enacted into law, Helms joined the CIA, worked his way up from an intelligence officer, ground level, to the director of the Central Intelligence Agency from 1966 to 1973. Now, how did Richard Helms become involved with UFOs? He had his own story about a UFO incident that happened in the 1950s at a foreign location. And he became immediately interested in the subject of UFOs, as he had with other aspects of the UFO or the ET phenomena. He passed away in 2002. He told stories about reading classified cables from CIA stations in Europe, where two CIA case officers on a clandestine mission were where a UFO appeared and disrupted the operation. After he left the agency, he continued to look in and have contact. And that's one reason he formed the Aviary in 1980. He still wanted to be involved in the program. And he was the motivating factor for all people within the Aviary. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you. Until next time.
If you liked this video and you want to see more amazing content, go ahead and check out the next video on our channel.